Hey, Zach here today on this cold winter's day. There's some snow on the ground, but we're not going to let that stop us. Today I'm in Cockeysville, Maryland, and we're going to be checking out the right-of-way of the old Northern Central Railway, which ran right through the area where I'm standing. As you can see behind me, there's still a lot of remnants to find from the old railroad. There's going to be a lot to see, so let's get started. In this video, we will trace the Northern Central Railway's path through Cockeysville, Maryland, visit the old freight station which still survives today, and check out where the railroad once crossed York Road, where this amazing bridge used to sit. But first, let's briefly familiarize ourselves with the layout and history of Cockeysville itself. Cockeysville, Maryland is a suburb of Baltimore, located 17 miles north of the city, along the Interstate 83 corridor. Cockeysville was founded in 1810 when Joshua Frederick Cockey built an inn and tavern along the Baltimore and York Turnpike, the present-day Route 45, or York Road. When the Baltimore and Susquehanna Railroad came through the area in the 1830s, Joshua Cockey Jr. built the first train station at the junction of railroad and turnpike, helping to boost the town into a transportation hub for the local farms and quarries. In 1854, the B&S Railroad was merged into the newly formed Northern Central Railway, and for the next 122 years, the NCR operated through Cockeysville, for most of that time under the control of the Pennsylvania Railroad. For more on the history of the NCR, check out my video on the NCR through New Freedom, Pennsylvania. In 1972, Hurricane Agnes came through the area and destroyed the tracks north of Cockeysville, but local trains still serviced the area south of York Road until the early 21st century, with Conrail taking over in 1976 and Norfolk Southern in 1999. The small area shown here saw over 170 years of railroad history before being completely abandoned over 2 decades ago. Nowadays, you can drive down York Road and never even realize that a railroad crossed here, let alone that there was actually an underpass here, or a passenger station right next to the road. Modern developments have all but erased the presence of a rail siding and Wye that used to service the nearby quarries. But there are some remnants left to see, including the old freight station that used to sit right between the Wye tracks. We're going to check out what remnants there are from all of these places, and we'll start our exploration here, where the tracks once crossed Cockeysville Road. So here we're looking south across Cockeysville Road, and the wooded area we see is actually the old right-of-way for the railroad. At one point, 3 tracks crossed the road at this location. We can see the patch on the road marking the location of the last remaining track to be removed. Here is a picture of a Penn Central locomotive crossing this road in 1972, 1 month before Hurricane Agnes' fateful arrival. One benefit of it being wintertime is there's no pesky leaves getting in the way of seeing the tracks still in there. They pretty much come right up to the road. The track we're walking on here was actually a siding to service the freight station and access the Wye. The track on the far left was the northbound line, and the remnants we see here in the middle would have been the southbound line, which looks like it was abandoned long before the other two. Even without the leaves, there is a tangled mess of branches to weave through here. I doubt this section of track is from the middle line. More likely it was removed from the road before paving. We can see it has been cut right next to the joiner. Here is the northbound track, which would have been the last one in actual service in the early 2000s. Despite being the last in service, we can see that a tree has grown between the rails in the last 20 plus years. We're coming up to an area where the middle track is still intact, and there's a haze bumper still in place. Further on, the middle track actually still looks pretty good and was likely used for car storage at some point. The bumper we just saw would have helped prevent those cars from passing on to the removed section. I thought there may have been another track up here, but there isn't much evidence of one. From up on this little hill, though, the 3 abandoned tracks do present quite a picture. For one thing, the multi-track right-of-way demonstrates how important the railroad was to Cockeysville, but seeing them in this sorry state just shows how much has been lost to time. Going any further south would be pretty hard, as the overgrowth gets a lot thicker from here on. The tracks continue in this overgrown state until Warren Road, where they meet up with the Baltimore Light Rail. The light rail uses the old Northern Central right-of-way south of this point, but we can see that it veers sharply to the west here, just north of the road. From there, it takes a meandering path to its terminus at the mall in Hunt Valley, completely bypassing the path of the NCR through Cockeysville. This isn't too surprising because when the light rail was built through this area in 1997, the NCR tracks were still in service up to the old freight station. It's interesting to note that the light rail tracks in the area of Warren Road were actually built on an old industrial spur that existed there since the 1960s. In this 1994 image that predates the light rail construction, we can clearly see that spur, including its many branches to customer buildings, as well as the Y junction with the old main line. Kind of ironic that the old spur would become the light rail main line, while the old NCR main line would essentially become a siding. Looking back at the more recent image of the area, we can still see the northern branch of the Y, as well as some of the remnants of the industrial spur. Here I am at ground level at the Warren Road crossing, looking north, and we can see the light rail tracks veering off to the west, while a single rusty track continues on toward Cockeysville. Note the derailleur on the track. For a time, between 1997 and 2005, freight trains still ran onto this spur. They would usually run at night, so as not to interfere with the light rail operation, since the two would have to share the track south of here. Sometimes a train would get stuck north of the junction, like the Norfolk Southern one seen here in 2004. In that event, the freight train would have to wait for nighttime to return down to Baltimore. Here we are looking south from Warren Road, where the two sets of tracks come together. We can see this crossing and junction better from the air. South of Warren Road, the double-tracked light rail line continues on toward Timonium on the old Northern Central right-of-way. Let's go a little lower to see some more details. Still looking south, we can see the remnants of an old siding on the left, and the northern branch of the old Y is seen on the right. The Y itself does seem intact, if a little overgrown. It is still connected to the abandoned tracks, as well as to the light rail tracks paralleling Warren Road. The rest of this 1960s era industrial spur is a lot more worse off. It is not connected anymore, and most of the tracks have been ripped up. The tracks are still there in that crossing, though. Let's head north toward Cockeysville Road and see what condition the tracks are in along the way. After that switch, the northbound rails are overgrown, but the southbound tracks are pretty clear for a good distance. The northbound tracks actually look torn up in some spots. Eventually the tracks enter the overgrown area we were exploring earlier. At some point I imagined there was a crossover to the northbound track, since that one was the last one in service north of Cockeysville Road. We're coming up to the section of tracks that I was exploring on foot, essentially bringing us back full circle to where we started. As I'm leaving this overgrown area, check out the old leaning telegraph pole among the trees. Just another relic from a bygone era. I did check for dates on the rails, and I found this clear 1926 marking on one of the siding tracks. As we come back out of the woods at Cockeysville Road, there are a number of things to see across the street in the Interstate Tire parking lot. We can see the rails for the northbound tracks sticking out of the ground here and leading right to that patched section of Cockeysville Road. And to the side here, right next to the road, is an old bumper sticking out of the paving, showing the location of an old siding. The name embossed here is Durable Bumping Post, and the date on the bumper is 1920. The northbound rails continue through this parking lot and under these parked trailers. I'm guessing the siding that submerged bumper was on would have run up alongside of this building on the right. Here's a Conrail era engine and caboose in the late 1970s or early 1980s, sitting next to this same building. Look how far the tracks still continued to the north at this time. Here we are on the other side of those trailers, standing on where the northbound tracks would have been. We can see some rails for the siding alongside the building here. And we can still see the location of the tracks heading to the north. Let's double back to the edge of the Interstate Tire parking lot. Here we can see the rails for the freight station siding, running up under the cars on the right. And we can see the southern branch of the old Wye heading across the railroad avenue to the left. We'll explore that siding in more detail later. For now, we're going to check out the old freight station which still survives just ahead. This freight station dates back to the 1890s and was built by Joshua Cockey III, the grandson of the founder of Cockeysville. The station was eventually sold to the Northern Central in 1902. The vehicles are blocking our view of this side, so I snuck in closer to check out the freight door and the old woodwork. The Maryland Transit Administration is the current owner of the building, but I guess they don't use it too much, judging by how overgrown these stairs are. These stairs look in much better condition in this old image taken during the Penn Central era, likely in the late 1960s or early 1970s. The train seen here is sitting on the siding track next to the station. This station handled the shipment of marble and other stone, and it sat right between the Y branches of the siding that serviced the nearby quarries, as seen in this 1946 map. The passenger station was further up the tracks, across York Road. I'm not sure the purpose of this blue building. It doesn't show up on the 1946 map, so it must be more recent than that. I assume it was railroad related though, since the other side has an obvious freight door. Today, if the sign is to be believed, this building houses a fine furniture restoration business. Here's another Conrail era image of this area seeing plenty of railroad activity, even though it was essentially the end of the line at that point. Besides the local train, we see what looks like a tanker car sitting on the siding next to the freight station. Compare this to a much older image taken in the same location. Here we see that there used to be a signal bridge right next to the freight station. I imagine this was removed when the tracks were relegated to siding status after Hurricane Agnes. Continuing north of these buildings, the area next to Railroad Avenue is pretty vacant, but there are still traces of the old tracks here. Most notably, we can see some old ties here. Judging by their location next to the old buildings, I'm guessing this was the freight station siding. This area would have been approximately where the northern branch of the Wye would have met the main line. Aside from the track remnants and station, there are other reminders of the railroad history here. I've mentioned that this little through road is Railroad Avenue, but check out the name of this industrial park, Railroad Crossing. This is very aptly named as we come up to York Road, and the location where the tracks crossed it. Compare our view right now to one from 100 years ago in this exact same spot. This image is a smorgasbord of historical sites, most of which are long gone. The passenger station is across the road on the left, and we can see the platforms on either side of the tracks. On the extreme left is an interlocking and signal tower that was moved here from another location in 1905 to eliminate the need for grade crossing watchmen. Here is an image from further back showing the run-up to the tower, which was rendered obsolete in 1930 when automatic crossing gates and lights were installed. The passenger train in the distance is sitting at the station. Looking at how busy this road is today, could you imagine the traffic jams that would occur if there was an active railroad crossing here now? Well, in the late 1920s, long before Interstate 83 was built, this was the main road between Baltimore and York, Pennsylvania, and the people in charge were already thinking of potential bottlenecks and safety concerns regarding this crossing. So in 1931, a plan was implemented for separating the grades between road and track. This involved digging out an underpass for the road while keeping the tracks level on the new bridge. You can tell from this picture just how great an undertaking this was. Look how high the station is, towering over the newly dug channel. And this was all done with minimal interruption to rail service, because the tracks were routed around the construction site. You can just see them going around to the right and continuing behind our point of view. Here's another view from further back, where we can see that temporary railroad bridge. This picture also gives more of a feel for the length of the channel that was dug for the highway. The completed structure was quite a sight to behold, sending the road far below the original ground level, while retaining space on the sides for access to the pre-existing businesses. There were even stairs to carry the sidewalk under the tracks, too. Because of all these space allowances on the sides, the roadway here was confined to only 2 lanes through the underpass. And as traffic volumes increased over the years, this confinement would itself become a bottleneck. If this wasn't enough, the underpass was prone to flooding during storms, rendering the road impassable during those times. By 1990, with the tracks long gone, the bridge was rendered irrelevant and the decision was made to finally remove it entirely, allowing the roadway to be widened and re-leveled. Today there is barely a hint of the old underpass that sat here for nearly 60 years. But supposedly much of the structure still remains under the surface. It was just filled in and paved over to make way for the new roadway. Here we are on the east side of York Road, coming to the location where the passenger station once stood. It would have been roughly where this brick building stands now. Unfortunately, some of the clearest pictures that I could find of the station were taken after it had already been abandoned. The Northern Central ended local commuter rail service through this area in 1959, rendering the station largely unnecessary. This and the previous picture was likely taken around the late 1960s, when freights and some through passenger trains still frequented the tracks. Note the old baggage cart on the porch, surviving there despite the obviously abandoned passenger platforms. In this picture, circa 1970, we can see the station sitting at the end of the old overpass. The tracks would have been on the right behind the metal fence. The station was finally razed in 1974, after sitting mostly unused for over a decade. This parking lot sits right on the old railroad right-of-way. Despite the redevelopment of the area, it's worth checking out if there are any remnants left here. I thought some of the lines in this pavement might be indicators of the old tracks, but that is probably just wishful thinking. As I come to the end of the paved area, my hopes are rising a little. And lo and behold, there are some rails still here. They are just mostly covered in dirt and rocks. Looking back, we can clearly see the old right-of-way leading toward the road. But let's keep going for a bit. Here's some more rail sticking through. Let's continue on a bit to see what else we can find. Well, it looks like some of the rails were ripped up, and here is a big pile of them. The old path through the woods here is still pretty clear of trees after all these years. And the other overgrowth is manageable. Incidentally, just up ahead here, there used to be an old factory complex that was serviced by the railroad. It shows up on the 1946 map, labeled as a lumber veneering business. Unfortunately, before I go much further, the path becomes a little too dense to traverse. So let's check out the area from the air. There is the old passenger station site. And now we're flying right over the old railroad right-of-way. That area on the left there, between the tracks and the river, is the old factory site that we saw on the map. The right-of-way does get difficult to see eventually, but it would have continued right below us. This would have been the site of a bridge over the Beaver Dam Run. It was removed in the 1980s. Less than a mile beyond this point, the old right-of-way emerges from the woods in Ashland. It is here where the Torrey C. Brown Rail Trail begins. This trail, opened in 1984 and locally known as the NCR Trail, runs from here to the Pennsylvania border on the path of the old railroad. I will explore Ashland and other areas along the NCR Trail in future videos. Now, referring back to this map of the historical railroad sites of Cockeysville, we've covered all of them except the old Wye and Siding, so let's go explore that a bit. The Wye itself started out as a standard siding, built in the early 1870s to reach the various quarries that were prevalent in the area. Sometime before 1900, A northern leg was added, completing the Wye. Among other uses, this gave the railroad a convenient place to turn locomotives and trains around. We can see the complete Wye and some of the siding on this 1938 aerial image, which also shows the relatively new York Road Underpass. We know the Wye was still complete on the 1946 map we saw earlier. By 1994, however, the northern leg looks to have been removed, and although we can still see the path of the original siding, it's likely that even that was already abandoned by then. Earlier we saw the remnants of the old switch, and we saw the siding track crossing Railroad Avenue before ending in a pile of rocks at a steep embankment. From the air we can see this same spot, and we can mentally extrapolate the curved path that the siding would have taken through the parking lot beyond. The level of the parking lot has been significantly changed with recent developments to the area, but here is how the spot looked in 1972, with a Penn Central train servicing the siding. Let's see what we can spot by air. The track would have crossed the creek here, but the bridge is obviously long gone. On the other side, though, there looks to still be some tracks in the pavement. Looking further on, there definitely seems to be potential for finding remnants of the spur line through here. It's time to go exploring on ground level, I think. We'll track our progress on this handy map. First, let's go to the bottom of the parking lot along the creek here. We don't see any track remnants here, but there are the old abutments for the bridge that carried it across the creek. And on the other side, it looks like there might actually be some rails there. Next stop, the other side of the creek. Indeed, there are rails still on this side, coming right up to the edge of the abutment. They disappear into the rocks under this garbage truck, but we can see them sticking out of the pavement further on, with what looks like the remnants of a switch track here. They disappear again under these parked tankers. I checked further on beyond the tankers, but the tracks were likely hidden at this point under the rocks. I drove through that parking area not seeing anything until I got here, where this section of track resurfaces briefly. It's easy to see that it ran along this graded area next to the building. Walking along here, I couldn't find them again, until the end where it became clear that they had been well buried along there the whole time. They crossed the road into this stone supply business, which is fitting seeing that that was the original purpose of this spur. Unfortunately, the area is fenced in and cannot be explored. Not ready to give up, though, I went to the parking lot next door. There, I got lucky again, finding the rails running right up alongside the parking lot. They continue along, coming awfully close to that building ahead. In the parking lot beyond that building, I was able to continue tracing the path. Finding more protruding rails. These rails run right up to this fenced-in storage area here. I climbed the hill behind this area, but here is where the trail finally went cold. It's definitely possible that the tracks crossed to the businesses on the other side of this creek, but I found no evidence of a bridge here. It's also possible that I was just following one of the many potential branches on the spur line. The old maps show the main artery staying on this side of the Gunpowder Falls. I did drive around the area some more to see if I could find other traces, but in most cases, the likely spots were either overly redeveloped or on inaccessible private property. So I decided to be content with what I'd found, which was quite a lot for a spur that went out of service decades ago. And that brings a close to my exploration of Cockeysville, Maryland. So much history in this relatively small area. The railroad ran through here for over 150 years, but these days there is precious little to commemorate that history, other than a few crumbling relics and the enduring memories of those who were lucky enough to witness it. I only wish I could count myself among them. Well, I hope you liked this look at the remnants of the Northern Central Railway in Cockeysville, Maryland. We'll explore more of the NCR Trail in future videos, so if you don't want to miss it, please consider subscribing. Also, leave a like and a comment. Until next time, see you later.